The dust cloud on the horizon had grown smaller with each passing hour until it disappeared entirely, and Tessa Owens realized with a sickening certainty that her family was not coming back for her. She stood at the abandoned trading post on the outskirts of Independence, Missouri, her hands trembling as she clutched the worn carpet bag containing everything she owned. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and flies buzzed around the dried goods scattered across the weathered porch. Her father had told her to wait here while he went to check on the wagon wheel that had been giving them trouble. That was 3 days ago. The journey west had been her father's dream, not hers. After her mother died of cholera the previous winter, he had become obsessed with starting fresh in Oregon Territory. He had remarried quickly, too quickly, to a widow named Margaret who had 3 children of her own. Tessa, at 19, had suddenly become an inconvenience, an extra mouth to feed, another body taking up precious space in the covered wagon. She should have seen it coming. Margaret's cold glances, her father's increasing distance, the way they had started discussing supplies and rations when they thought she was asleep. But she had never imagined they would simply leave her behind like an unwanted piece of furniture. The trading post had been closed for months, maybe longer. The windows were broken and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Tessa had been surviving on the dried apples and hardtack she had in her bag, rationing carefully, but her supplies were running desperately low. The well behind the building still had water, murky and questionable, but it kept her alive. She had no money, no prospects, no family. The realization hit her fresh each morning when she woke on the hard wooden floor of the abandoned building, using her extra dress as a pillow. On the 4th day, she heard horses. Her heart leaped with foolish hope that her father had come back, that he had realized his mistake, that everything would be explained and forgiven. But when she rushed to the broken window, she saw 3 men on horseback, rough-looking characters with guns on their hips and eyes that made her blood run cold. Tessa scrambled away from the window and pressed herself against the far wall, trying to control her breathing. She heard them dismount, heard their boots on the wooden steps. "Place looks abandoned," one of them said, his voice carrying through the broken windows. "Might be something worth taking anyway," another replied. Tessa looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the interior of the trading post was bare except for some empty shelves and a counter that would not conceal her. She grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor, knowing it would do little good against 3 armed men, but it was all she had. The door creaked open and light flooded the dim interior. The first man stepped inside and his eyes immediately found her. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Well, well, what do we have here, please?" Tessa said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound brave. "I do not want any trouble, I am just passing through." "Passing through?" The man laughed and took another step forward, on foot with nothing but that little bag. "I do not think so, sweetheart." The other 2 men crowded into the doorway behind him, blocking her only exit. Tessa gripped the piece of wood tighter, her heart hammering in her chest. "Leave me alone," she said, trying to inject steel into her voice. "I have nothing you want." "I would not say that," the first man said, and the others laughed. Tessa raised the piece of wood, prepared to fight even though she knew it was hopeless. But before the man could take another step, a voice rang out from outside, deep and commanding, "Step away from the building. Now." The 3 men froze. The leader turned slowly, hand moving toward his gun. "I would not do that if I were you," the voice continued. "I have a Winchester aimed at your back and I do not miss." Tessa could not see the speaker from her position, but she watched the calculation cross the leader's face. After a long moment he stepped back, hands raised slightly. "We were just looking around," he said. No harm meant, mount up and ride out. If I see you in these parts again, I will not be so generous with warnings. The three men exchanged glances, then filed out of the building. Tessa heard them mount their horses, heard the thunder of hooves as they rode away. She stood frozen, still clutching her makeshift weapon, wondering if she had traded one danger for another. A shadow fell across the doorway, and a man stepped into view. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His hair was dark brown with hints of gray at the temples, and his eyes were a striking blue that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore work clothes, dusty and practical, and he held a rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to use it. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "Are you hurt?" he asked, lowering the rifle. Tessa shook her head, not trusting her voice. He looked around the abandoned trading post, then back at her. "This is not a safe place for a young woman alone. Where is your family?" The question broke something inside her. Tessa felt tears sting her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "Gone," she managed. "They left me." His expression shifted, something like anger crossing his features. "Left you? Here?" "We were traveling west," Tessa said, the words tumbling out now that someone was actually listening. "My father remarried after my mother died. His new wife has children of her own, and I suppose there was not enough room for all of us. He told me to wait here while he checked on the wagon, but that was 4 days ago. I saw their dust trail heading west without me." The man was quiet for a long moment, and Tessa could not read his expression. Finally, he said, "My name is Yates Fletcher. I have a ranch about 10 miles south of here. You cannot stay in this place." "I have nowhere else to go," Tessa said quietly. "No money, no family." "I am offering you somewhere to go," Yates said. "My ranch. I lost my wife 2 years ago and I could use help with the household. I have ranch hands for the outdoor work, but the house has been neglected. If you are willing to work, you would have a roof over your head and food to eat." Tessa stared at him, trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. But his eyes were steady and honest, and she thought about those 3 men and how vulnerable she was here alone. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me." "I know what it is like to lose everything," Yates said simply. "And I know leaving someone behind is about the lowest thing a person can do. You deserve better than this." Tessa looked around the abandoned trading post, at the broken windows, and the dust-covered floor that had been her home for 4 desperate days. She looked at this stranger who had driven off 3 dangerous men and was offering her a lifeline. "I will work hard," she said. "I can cook and clean and mend. I will earn my keep." "I do not doubt it," Yates said. "Get your things. We should leave before those men decide to come back." Tessa grabbed her carpet bag, checking quickly to make sure her few belongings were still inside. When she stepped out into the sunshine, she saw Yates's horse, a magnificent bay gelding, tied to the porch railing. There was also a pack horse laden with supplies. "I was coming back from town," Yates explained, seeing her look at the supplies. "Lucky timing." He helped her onto the pack horse, then mounted his own. As they rode away from the trading post, Tessa looked back once at the place where her family had abandoned her. Then she turned her face forward, toward whatever future awaited her at Yates Fletcher's ranch. The ride took most of the afternoon. Yates did not talk much, but his silence was comfortable rather than oppressive. He pointed out landmarks occasionally, helping her get her bearings in this unfamiliar country. The landscape was beautiful in its own way, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that swayed in the wind like waves on an ocean. "How long have you had the ranch?" Tessa asked, needing to break the silence. "About 5 years," Yates replied. "My wife Sarah and I started it together. She was the one with the vision. I just did the heavy lifting. I am sorry for your loss, Tessa said quietly. Fever took her, Yates said, his voice tight. She was gone in 3 days. I thought about selling the place after she died, but she loved it so much. It felt like giving up on her memory. Tessa understood that kind of grief, the kind that hollowed you out from the inside. She had felt it when her mother died, though her father had not given her time to properly mourn before marrying Margaret and upending their entire life. I think she would be glad you kept it, Tessa said. Yates glanced at her, something like gratitude in his eyes. I hope so. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they crested a hill, and Tessa saw the ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, with a sturdy house, a big barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, indicating the ranch hands were preparing their evening meal. It is beautiful, Tessa said, and she meant it. Sarah designed the house herself, Yates said, and Tessa heard the pride in his voice. She wanted big windows to let in the light, and a porch where we could sit in the evenings. As they rode down toward the ranch, Tessa saw men emerge from the bunkhouse, watching their approach with curiosity. Yates raised a hand in greeting and they waved back, though their eyes remained fixed on Tessa. Yates helped her dismount in front of the house, then grabbed her bag. Come on, I will show you inside. The house was indeed beautiful, with polished wood floors and large windows that let in the fading sunlight. But it was also clear that no woman had tended it in some time. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and there was a general air of neglect that made Tessa's fingers itch to start cleaning. I know it is a mess, Yates said, sounding almost apologetic. I have been focused on keeping the ranch running. The house has suffered for it. It is a good house, Tessa said. It just needs some attention. Where should I put my things? Yates showed her to a bedroom on the first floor, small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the front pasture. This was supposed to be a guest room, he said. You can make it your own. After he left her to settle in, Tessa sat on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. 4 days ago, she had been traveling west with her family, despite their coldness toward her. Now she was alone on a stranger's ranch, utterly dependent on his charity. But as she looked around the clean, safe room, she found herself feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. That evening, Yates knocked on her door and invited her to join him for supper. She found the kitchen table set for 2, and he had prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. I am not much of a cook, he admitted as they sat down. One of the ranch hands, Miguel, usually takes pity on me and sends over extra food. Tomorrow I will cook, Tessa said. If you show me where everything is. They ate in companionable silence for a while, then Yates said, I should tell you about the ranch hands. There are 4 of them living in the bunkhouse. Miguel, Carlos, Tom, and Henry. They are good men, all of them. I trust them completely. But if any of them make you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. All right, Tessa said, grateful for his protectiveness. The work here is hard, Yates continued. We run cattle, and this time of year we are preparing for winter. I will not lie to you and say it is easy. But you will always have food, shelter, and safety here. That is a promise. Thank you, Tessa said, and she meant it with her whole heart. You saved my life today. You would have found a way, Yates said. You had a piece of wood and were ready to fight 3 armed men. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Tessa said with a weak smile. I have found the 2 are often related, Yates replied, and Tessa caught a glimpse of humor in his eyes that made him seem younger, less burdened. Over the following days, Tessa threw herself into work. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, washed all the neglected linens, and organized the kitchen. She baked bread and prepared proper meals, taking pride in seeing Yates's appreciation when he came in from a long day of work to find hot food waiting. The ranch hands were curious about her but respectful. Miguel, the oldest, had a kind face and a wife and children in a nearby town. He treated Tessa like a daughter, offering advice about the local area and warning her about which roads to avoid. Carlos was younger, quick with a joke, and he often brought her wildflowers he found on the range. Tom and Henry were brothers, quiet but hardworking, and they tipped their hats whenever they saw her. But it was Yates who occupied most of her thoughts. She found herself watching for him throughout the day, listening for his footsteps on the porch, timing her cooking so the food would be ready when he came in. He was unfailingly kind to her, but there was a sadness in him that never quite went away, a shadow that crossed his face when he thought no one was looking. 2 weeks after she arrived, Tessa was in the barn gathering eggs from the chickens when she heard raised voices outside. She set down her basket and peered around the barn door to see Yates talking with a man she did not recognize. The stranger was well dressed, with a silver-trimmed saddle on his horse and an air of self-importance that rubbed Tessa the wrong way immediately. "I am telling you, Fletcher, my offer is generous," the stranger was saying. "This land is worth twice what you are producing from it. Sell to me now and you can move on with your life." "I have told you before, Wallace, the ranch is not for sale," Yates said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I do not care how generous your offer is." "You are being stubborn," Wallace said. "A man alone cannot run a place this size properly. You need a wife, children, a future. All you have here are memories of the dead." Tessa saw Yates's hands curl into fists and she held her breath, afraid he might hit the man. But Yates's voice, when he spoke, was cold and steady. "Get off my land, Wallace, and do not come back." Wallace sneered. "You will change your mind eventually. This place will break you, and when it does, I will be there to pick up the pieces. At a much lower price, I might add." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving Yates standing in the yard, shoulders rigid with tension. Tessa emerged from the barn and Yates turned to look at her. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," Tessa said. "Who was that man?" "Vernon Wallace," Yates said, spitting the name like a curse. "He owns most of the land around here and wants mine too. He has been after me to sell since Sarah died." "He seems unpleasant," Tessa said, which was putting it mildly. Yates laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That is one way to describe him. Come on, I need coffee." They walked back to the house together, and Tessa poured them both cups of the strong brew she had learned to make the way Yates liked it. They sat at the kitchen table, and Tessa watched him slowly relax, the tension draining from his shoulders. "Sarah used to say that land is more than just dirt and grass," Yates said quietly. "She said it is memory and sweat and dreams. This place has all of those things. I cannot sell it, even if keeping it is the harder path." "Then you should not," Tessa said firmly. "That man has no right to pressure you." Yates looked at her with something like surprise. "You have been here 2 weeks, and you already feel that strongly about it." "I have been here 2 weeks, and it already feels more like home than anywhere I have lived in the past year," Tessa said. "Since my mother died, I have felt like I was floating, unattached to anything. Here, I feel like I have a purpose." Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I am glad you are here, Tessa. I did not realize how lonely this place had become until you arrived." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Tessa felt her heart beat faster, felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I should start on lunch," she said, standing abruptly. "The men will be hungry." If Yates noticed her sudden need for movement, he did not comment. He finished his coffee and headed back outside, but Tessa caught him glancing back at her through the kitchen window, and she felt that warmth again, stronger this time. As September turned into October, the work on the ranch intensified. They were moving cattle to lower pastures, repairing fences before winter, and laying in supplies for the cold months ahead. Tessa worked alongside everyone, learning to do tasks she had never imagined. She helped Miguel patch the bunkhouse roof, assisted Carlos in the vegetable garden, and even learned to milk the cows when Tom showed her the technique. But it was the evenings she treasured most, when Yates would come in tired and dust-covered, and she would have dinner waiting. They would sit together at the table, talking about the day, making plans for the ranch, sharing stories about their pasts. She learned that Yates had grown up in Kentucky, that he had always dreamed of having his own land, that he could play the harmonica but was too self-conscious to do it in front of others. He learned that Tessa had wanted to be a teacher before her mother died, that she loved reading but rarely had access to books, that she missed her mother every single day but was starting to make peace with her father's abandonment. "You ever think about going after them?" Yates asked one evening. "Your family?" Tessa considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I wonder what I would say. They made their choice. I cannot force them to want me." "Their loss," Yates said firmly. "You are worth a dozen of them." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes at his words. "You hardly know me." "I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met," Yates said. "I know you turned this house back into a home. I know you face every challenge without complaint. That tells me everything I need to know." Their eyes met across the table, and Tessa felt something electric pass between them. Yates reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "Tessa, I need to tell you something," he began, but before he could continue there was a sharp knock at the door. Yates released her hand and went to answer it. Miguel stood on the porch, his face grim. "We have a problem, boss," he said. "Someone cut the fence on the north pasture." About 20 head of cattle wandered off. Yates cursed under his breath. "When?" "Tom noticed it about an hour ago. We have been trying to round them up, but it is getting dark." "I will get my horse," Yates said. He turned to Tessa. "I might be late." "Be careful," Tessa said, trying to ignore the twist of worry in her stomach. She watched from the porch as Yates and Miguel rode off into the gathering darkness, then went back inside to clean up from dinner. But she could not settle. She kept going to the window, looking for the lights of returning riders. It was past midnight when she finally heard horses. She rushed to the door and found Yates dismounting, exhausted and frustrated. "Did you find them?" she asked. "Most of them," Yates said. "We are still missing about 5 head. We will look again in the morning." "Was it an accident? The fence breaking?" Yates's jaw tightened. "No, it was cut deliberately. Someone wanted those cattle to wander off." "Wallace," Tessa said, and it was not a question. "I cannot prove it," Yates said. "But yes, I think so." Tessa felt anger surge through her. "You should report him to the sheriff." "With what evidence?" Yates asked wearily. "All I have is suspicion. Wallace is careful. He never gets his own hands dirty." "So he just gets away with it, for now," Yates said. "But I will be more vigilant. We all will." Tessa had heated water for washing, and she brought it to Yates along with clean towels. He looked at her with such gratitude that she felt her heart squeeze. "You do not have to take care of me," he said softly. "I want to," Tessa replied, and she realized it was completely true. Somewhere in the past month, her feelings for Yates had grown into something deeper than gratitude, something that felt dangerously like love. As October wore on, Wallace's harassment continued. More fences were cut, a water trough was poisoned, and someone tried to spook the horses in the middle of the night. Each incident was small enough to be ambiguous, but together they painted a clear picture. Wallace was trying to make life so difficult that Yates would give up and sell. But Yates was stubborn, and so was Tessa. They worked together to counter each attack, staying up late to patrol the property, checking fences twice daily, moving the cattle to more secure pastures. The ranch hands were fiercely loyal, working extra hours without complaint to protect the land they considered home. Through it all, Tessa and Yates grew closer. Their hands would brush when passing dishes at dinner. Their eyes would meet across the room, holding for seconds too long. When Yates helped her down from a wagon, his hands would linger on her waist, and she would feel heat spread through her entire body. The tension between them was becoming unbearable, and Tessa knew something would have to give. It happened on a cold evening in late October. Tessa had made stew for dinner, and she and Yates were sitting by the fireplace, the dishes washed and put away. Yates had surprised her by bringing out his harmonica, and he played a slow, haunting melody that made her heart ache. When he finished, Tessa said, "That was beautiful." "Sarah's favorite song," Yates said, looking into the fire. "I have not played it since she died." "Would she mind," Tessa asked carefully, "that you played it for me?" Yates was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "Sarah was practical about everything, even death. She made me promise, before the fever took her completely, that I would not spend my life mourning. She said I was too young to be alone, that I deserved to be happy again." "That was generous of her," Tessa said. "That was Sarah," Yates said. "She always thought of others before herself." He turned to look at Tessa, firelight dancing in his blue eyes. "I think she would have liked you." "I wish I could have known her," Tessa said honestly. "I wish you could have too," Yates said. "But Tessa, I need you to know something. These past 2 months, having you here, it has changed everything. I wake up in the morning, and instead of dreading another empty day, I look forward to seeing you at breakfast. I come in from work, and instead of a cold, dark house, there is warmth and light and the smell of your cooking. You have given me back something I thought I lost forever." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "Yates, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Yates said, moving closer to her on the settee. "But I need you to know how I feel. I am falling in love with you, Tessa. I think I have been since the day I found you in that trading post, ready to fight off 3 men with a piece of wood." "I was terrified," Tessa whispered. "You were magnificent," Yates said. He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Tell me if I am wrong. Tell me if you do not feel it too." "You are not wrong," Tessa said, leaning into his touch. "I feel it too. I love you, Yates. I think I have been falling in love with you from the moment you offered me a home." Yates's eyes lit up with joy, and then he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Tessa wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling like she was finally home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I am sure. I want you here not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, sitting close together by the fire, stealing kisses between words. They would have a simple wedding, they decided, in the spring when the wildflowers were blooming. Miguel would stand up for Yates, and they would invite the ranch hands and the few neighbors who had been kind to them. But first, they had to get through the winter, and Wallace's harassment showed no signs of stopping. The next morning, Tessa woke up feeling like she was floating. She prepared breakfast with a smile on her face, humming under her breath. When Yates came down, freshly shaved and grinning, he swept her into his arms and kissed her soundly. "Good morning, future Mrs. Fletcher," he said. "Good morning, future husband," Tessa replied, loving the way the words felt in her mouth. They told the ranch hands at breakfast, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Miguel clapped Yates on the back, Carlos whooped with joy, and Tom and Henry offered their congratulations. They all loved Tessa and were glad to see their boss happy again, but the celebration was short-lived. That afternoon, Tom came racing back to the ranch, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss, you need to come quick," he said. "They are burning the south pasture." Yates went white. "What?" "Someone set fire to the grass. It is spreading fast." Everyone mobilized immediately. They grabbed shovels and wet blankets and rode hard toward the south pasture. Tessa stayed at the ranch, pacing anxiously, praying that no one would be hurt. It was nearly dark when they returned, exhausted and covered in soot. They had managed to stop the fire before it spread to the barn or the house, but they had lost several acres of grazing land and 2 steers who could not escape fast enough. Yates was angrier than Tessa had ever seen him. "That is it," he said, washing his hands and face with jerky, violent movements. "I am going to Wallace tomorrow and ending this." "Be careful," Tessa said. "He is dangerous." "So am I," Yates said grimly. The next morning, despite Tessa's protests, Yates rode to Wallace's ranch. Tessa spent the hours he was gone in an agony of worry, imagining every terrible scenario. When she finally heard his horse returning, she ran out to meet him. "What happened?" she asked. Yates dismounted, his expression hard. "I told him if anything else happens on my land, I will go to the federal marshal in Kansas City. I told him I have been keeping records of every incident with dates and times. I told him I might not be able to prove it is him, but I can make his life very uncomfortable with an investigation." "What did he say?" "He denied everything, of course, but I saw worry in his eyes. He knows I am serious." "Do you think he will stop?" "I do not know," Yates said, "but I had to try." November brought cold winds and the first snowfall. The ranch settled into winter routines, the work shifting to caring for the animals and maintaining equipment. Tessa and Yates grew even closer, spending long evenings planning their future together. Tessa wrote to the county seat to request a copy of her birth certificate, needing the documentation for their marriage. It felt strange to be taking such an official step, but also right. She was building a new life, and she wanted everything to be proper and legal. To their relief, Wallace's harassment seemed to have stopped. There were no more incidents, no more cut fences or poisoned troughs. Yates remained vigilant, but as the weeks passed without trouble, they began to hope that his confrontation with Wallace had worked. In December, Miguel invited them to spend Christmas with his family in town. Tessa was nervous about meeting so many new people, but Miguel's wife, Rosa, welcomed her with open arms. Their children, 4 of them ranging from 6 to 14, were delighted to have visitors. The day was filled with laughter, good food, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire on the ride home. Bundled in blankets against the cold, Tessa said, "I want that someday. A house full of children and laughter." "So do I," Yates said, pulling her closer. "I want it with you." The new year, 1874, arrived with heavy snows that kept everyone close to the buildings. Tessa and Yates spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he was surprisingly well-read, that Sarah had owned a trunk full of books that he had not been able to look at since her death. "Would you mind if I read them?" Tessa asked carefully. Yates was quiet, then said, "No, I think Sarah would like that." She always said books were meant to be read, not just collected. Tessa found the trunk in the attic, carefully preserved under an oilcloth. Inside were dozens of books, everything from poetry to adventure novels to medical texts. She brought them down to the main room and spent winter evenings reading aloud to Yates while he repaired tack or carved wood. It was during one of these evenings that Yates said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." Tessa looked up from her book. "All right." "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Being here instead of going west with your family?" Tessa closed the book and thought about her answer. "I regret that my father did not love me enough to keep me," she said slowly. "I regret that I was not enough for him. But do I regret being here with you building this life? Not for a single moment. This is where I am supposed to be. I feel it in my bones." Yates crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with a passion that made her head spin. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never doubt that you are loved and wanted." "I know," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face. "I know." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, they began preparing for their wedding in earnest. Rosa helped Tessa make a dress from pale blue fabric they had ordered from town. It was simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Rosa had crocheted herself. Yates built new furniture for their bedroom, wanting everything to be fresh and special for their married life. He crafted a beautiful headboard from oak, carving their initials intertwined with a pattern of flowers. But their happiness was shadowed by news that filtered in from town. Vernon Wallace's financial situation was apparently deteriorating. He had made bad investments and his creditors were circling. People whispered that he was growing desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," Tessa suggested one evening, "until we know what Wallace might do." "No," Yates said firmly. "We have put our lives on hold long enough because of that man. We are getting married as planned." They set the date for the first Saturday in April, when the wildflowers would be blooming across the prairie. Tom rode to town to file the marriage license and invite the few people they wanted present. It would be a small ceremony, just family as they had come to define it. But 2 days before the wedding, Wallace made his final, desperate move. Tessa was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard shouting from outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and rushed to the window, her heart sinking at what she saw. Wallace was there with 4 armed men, and they had Yates backed against the barn. Miguel and the other ranch hands were emerging from various buildings, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Tessa did not think. She grabbed the rifle Yates kept by the door, checked that it was loaded, and marched outside. "Get off this property," she shouted, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "You are not welcome here." Wallace turned to look at her, surprise crossing his face. "So the little orphan has teeth," he said. "How touching. Put the gun down, sweetheart, before you hurt yourself." "I know how to use this," Tessa said, keeping the rifle trained on him. "And I will if you do not leave, right now." "This does not concern you," Wallace said. "This is between me and Fletcher." "Everything that concerns him concerns me," Tessa said. "We are getting married in 2 days. That makes this my land too, and you are trespassing." One of Wallace's men shifted his weight, hand moving toward his gun. Tessa swung the rifle toward him. "Do not even think about it." Yates used the distraction to move away from the barn, positioning himself where he could support Tessa if things went bad. Miguel and the others spread out, forming a semicircle. "You are outnumbered, Wallace," Yates said, "and you are making threats in front of witnesses. That federal marshal I mentioned, he is very interested in your activities. One more incident and he will have all the evidence he needs to arrest you." Wallace's face turned red with rage. "This land should be mine. I offered you a fair price." "You offered me blood money," Yates said coldly. "You have been sabotaging my ranch for months, trying to drive me out, but it did not work. I am not leaving, and neither is Tessa. This is our home, and you have no power here." The standoff seemed to last forever, though it was probably only seconds. Tessa kept the rifle steady, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Finally, Wallace seemed to deflate. "This is not over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Yates said. "It is over, Wallace. You lost. Now get off my land." Wallace gestured to his men, and they mounted up. As they rode away, Tessa finally lowered the rifle, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Yates was at her side immediately, taking the rifle and pulling her into his arms. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So could you," Tessa replied. "I was not going to stand by and watch." Miguel approached them, admiration clear on his face. "Miss Tessa, that was either the bravest or the craziest thing I have ever seen." "Probably both," Tessa admitted. They learned later that Wallace had indeed fled the area, his creditors having finally caught up with him. His ranch was sold at auction to cover his debts, and he was last seen heading further west, chasing whatever new scheme had caught his attention. The threat was finally, truly over. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Tessa woke in her small bedroom for the last time, knowing that tonight she would share Yates's room, would share his life in every way. Rosa arrived early to help her dress and arrange her hair. "You are glowing," Rosa said, smiling at Tessa's reflection in the mirror. "You are going to be a beautiful bride." "I am just happy," Tessa said, "happier than I ever thought possible." The ceremony took place in the afternoon, in the meadow behind the house where wildflowers created a carpet of purple and yellow. The circuit preacher, who happened to be passing through, performed the service. Miguel stood up for Yates, and Rosa stood with Tessa. As Tessa walked toward Yates, seeing the love in his eyes, she thought about the day he had found her at the abandoned trading post. She had been so broken then, so lost. And now here she was, walking toward a future full of hope and love. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Tessa felt tears of joy streaming down her face. When it came time for vows, Yates took her hands and said, "Tessa, you came into my life when I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone. You brought light back into the darkness. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. I promise to love you, to protect you, to be your partner and your friend for all the days of my life." Tessa's voice shook with emotion as she replied, "Yates, you saved me when I had nothing and no one. You gave me a home when I had been left behind. You showed me that I was worth loving, worth keeping. I promise to stand by your side, to work beside you, to love you with everything I am for as long as I live." "By the power vested in me," the preacher said, smiling, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Yates pulled Tessa into his arms and kissed her as their friends cheered. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying, Tessa thought her heart might burst from happiness. The celebration continued into the evening. Rosa had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing. Carlos played the guitar, and Miguel surprised everyone by revealing a beautiful singing voice. As the sun set, Yates and Tessa danced together, swaying to a slow melody under the stars. "Thank you," Tessa whispered. "For what?" Yates asked. "For finding me, for choosing me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Yates replied, "for giving me a second chance at happiness." That night, as they lay together in the big bed Yates had built, Tessa felt completely safe and loved for the first time since her mother had died. Yates held her close, his hand stroking her hair, and they talked about their future. "I want children," Tessa said. "I want to fill this house with love and laughter." "So do I," Yates said. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are wanted, that they will never be left behind." The words struck deep, and Tessa turned to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. They made love slowly, tenderly, cementing their bond in the most intimate way possible. As spring turned into summer, Tessa and Yates settled into married life. They worked side by side, making improvements to the ranch and planning for the future. In June, Tessa realized she was pregnant, and their joy was boundless. Yates became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work. Tessa tolerated his fussing because she knew it came from love, but she also stood her ground when his protectiveness became too much. "I am not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. "Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years." "But you are my wife," Yates said, "and that is my child. Let me take care of you." "You do take care of me," Tessa said, softening. "Every single day, but I also need to feel useful. I need to work." They found a compromise, as they always did. Tessa continued to do the work she enjoyed but avoided the heaviest tasks. Yates made sure she had help with everything, and Rosa checked on her regularly. As Tessa's belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared the small bedroom next to theirs as a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from the same oak Yates had used for their bed. Tom's wife, whom they had met at a summer barn dance, made baby clothes and blankets. In February of 1875, during a snowstorm that kept everyone trapped inside, Tessa went into labor. Rosa and 2 other women from nearby ranches had come to help, and Yates paced outside the bedroom door, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only 6 hours, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world, his baby crying. Rosa opened the door, her face glowing. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Tessa is fine. Tired, but fine." Yates rushed into the room and found Tessa propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiating joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. "Meet your son," she said, smiling up at him. Yates sat carefully on the bed and looked down at the small face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "We need to name him," Tessa said. "What do you think of James, after my father, even though he abandoned me?" "I want to take something good from that name and make it our own." "James Fletcher," Yates said, testing the name. "It is perfect, Jamie." Little Jamie was a good baby, generally content and healthy. Yates was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, rocking his son for hours, singing the same songs his own father had sung to him. Watching them together, Tessa felt her heart swell with love. This man, who had been a stranger 8 months ago, was now her entire world. He had given her everything she had lost and so much more. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Yates had taken on a new business partner, a fair and honest man who helped expand their cattle operation. They built a new barn and added more land, carefully managed and maintained. On Jamie's 2nd birthday, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, in the spring of 1877, they had a daughter they named Sarah, after Yates's first wife. Tessa had suggested it, wanting to honor the woman who had built this ranch and loved it so well. "Are you sure?" Yates had asked, emotional. "You do not have to do that." "She was part of your life, part of this place," Tessa said. "I am not threatened by her memory. I am grateful for it. She helped make you the man you are." Little Sarah was a firecracker from the start, strong-willed and adventurous. By the time she could walk, she was following her brother everywhere, determined to do everything he did. The years that followed were full and happy. They had 2 more children, a son named Thomas in 1879 and another daughter, Rose, in 1881. Their house was filled with noise and laughter, with scraped knees and bedtime stories, with all the chaos and joy of a growing family. Miguel and Rosa became like family, their children growing up alongside Tessa and Yates's. Carlos married a woman from town and brought her to live on the ranch. Tom and Henry both found wives and built houses on the property. The ranch became more than just a business. It became a community, a place where people looked out for each other and worked together toward common goals. Tessa often thought about her father and his new family. She wondered if they had made it to Oregon, if they had found what they were looking for. Sometimes she felt a twinge of sadness that they had never tried to find her, that they had never met her children. But mostly, she felt grateful. Being left behind had led her to Yates, to this life, to a happiness she could never have imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Tessa back to the meadow where they had been married. The wildflowers were in bloom again, just as they had been that April day in 1874. "Do you remember what I said to you in my vows?" Yates asked, taking her hands. "You said I brought light back into the darkness," Tessa replied, "that I gave you a reason to live instead of just survive." "Every word was true," Yates said, "but it is even more true now than it was then. You have given me everything, Tessa. A family, a home, a purpose. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "You did the same for me," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face. "I was lost and you found me. I was broken and you helped me heal. I was alone and you gave me a family." They kissed as they had on their wedding day, as they had 1,000 times since, but it never grew old. Every kiss was a promise renewed, a commitment reaffirmed. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, they could hear their children playing in the yard. Jamie, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Sarah how to rope a fence post. 4-year-old Thomas was helping Carlos in the garden, mostly by getting in the way. And 2-year-old Rose was toddling after everyone, determined not to be left out of anything. "We did good," Yates said, watching their children with pride. "We did very good," Tessa agreed. That evening, after the children were in bed, Tessa and Yates sat on the porch in the rocking chairs they had bought in town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could see cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures. "You ever think about that day I found you?" Yates asked. "At the trading post?" "Sometimes," Tessa said. "It feels like a lifetime ago. Like it happened to someone else." "I almost did not stop there," Yates admitted. "I was in a hurry to get home, but something told me to check the building. I have never been so glad I listened to that instinct." "I was so scared," Tessa remembered. "I thought those men were going to hurt me. And then you appeared like something out of a story." "You would have found a way to survive," Yates said. "You are the strongest person I know." "I am strong because you believed in me," Tessa said, "because you gave me a reason to be strong." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The horses in the barn, the cattle lowing in the distance, the crickets beginning their evening song. "I love you," Yates said suddenly, turning to look at her. "I need you to know that every day for the rest of our lives. I love you more than I can ever express in words." "I know," Tessa said, reaching for his hand. "I feel it in everything you do, every choice you make, and I love you the same way, with everything I am." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been abandoned by her birth family, left behind like unwanted baggage. It had felt like the end of her world, like her life was over before it had really begun. But it had not been an ending. It had been a beginning. Being left behind had led her to Yates, to this ranch, to the family they had built together. She had learned that family was not just about blood. It was about the people who chose to love you, who stood by you, who gave you a place to belong. Yates had given her all of that and more. He had seen her when she was at her lowest and offered her dignity and respect. He had given her work to do, purpose to her days. And then, as they had grown to know each other, he had given her his heart. In return, she had given him everything she was. She had loved him through the grief of losing Sarah, had helped him rebuild not just his home but his life. She had worked beside him, fought beside him, built a future beside him. And now they had this beautiful life, these wonderful children, this community of people who had become family. The ranch was thriving, their marriage was strong, and their children were growing up surrounded by love. It was more than Tessa had ever dared to dream of during those desperate days at the abandoned trading post. It was more than she had thought possible when her father rode away without her. As if reading her thoughts, Yates said, "I have been thinking about writing to your father, telling him about our life, about his grandchildren." Tessa considered it. Once the idea would have filled her with anger and hurt, but time and love had healed those wounds. "What would you say?" she asked. "That he made a mistake," Yates said. "That he left behind the most precious thing he had, but that his mistake was my blessing, and that his grandchildren are thriving even though they will never know him." "Do you think he would care?" Tessa asked. "Probably not," Yates admitted. "But maybe you would feel better getting to say those things." Tessa thought about it. "Maybe someday," she said. "But right now I do not want to look back. I just want to be here in this moment with you." "That sounds perfect to me," Yates said. Over the following years, their family continued to grow and flourish. Jamie developed a talent for working with horses, gentle and patient in a way that reminded Tessa of his father. Sarah showed an aptitude for numbers and helped keep the ranch books once she was old enough. Thomas loved the land itself, studying the grass and soil, learning how to keep it healthy and productive. And Rose, their youngest, had a gift for bringing people together, for seeing what needed to be done and making it happen. When Jamie turned 18, Yates deeded him a portion of the ranch to manage on his own. It was important to both Yates and Tessa that their children knew they would always have a place here, that they would never be forced to leave or feel unwanted. "This land is your birthright," Yates told each of his children as they came of age. "But more than that, it is your home. Whether you stay here or go out into the world, you will always belong here. Always." Those words, Tessa knew, were meant for her as much as for their children. They were a promise that she would never again feel the abandonment she had experienced that terrible day when she was 19. Sarah grew up and married a young man from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the Fletcher property. They had 3 children of their own, and Tessa delighted in being a grandmother, in spoiling her grandchildren, and then sending them home to their parents. Thomas married a teacher from town, and they split their time between the ranch and her small schoolhouse. Rose married last, at 23, to a man who made her laugh and treated her like a queen. Jamie, to everyone's surprise, did not marry until he was nearly 30. When he finally brought a young woman home, Yates pulled Tessa aside and said, "He waited because he was looking for what we have. He wanted to be sure." "Smart boy," Tessa said, watching Jamie with his bride-to-be, seeing the same love and devotion in his eyes that Yates had always shown her. As the years passed and Tessa and Yates grew older, they handed more and more of the daily ranch operation to their children. But they remained involved, offering advice when asked, helping where they could, and mostly just enjoying the legacy they had built. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Tessa and Yates celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and stories told of years gone by. As the party wound down and people began heading to their respective homes, Tessa and Yates found themselves alone on the porch again, just as they had been so many times over the years. 41 years, Yates said, shaking his head in wonder. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Tessa said. She was 60 now, her hair silver and her face lined, but her eyes still sparkled with the same spirit Yates had first fallen in love with. Yates was 62, his hair completely white but still strong and capable. "You have any regrets?" Yates asked. Tessa thought about the question seriously. "Only one," she said finally. "I regret that I wasted so much time being angry at my father. I wish I had been able to forgive him sooner, to let go of that hurt." "But you did let go eventually," Yates said. "That is what matters. What about you?" Tessa asked. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one," Yates said firmly. "Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you. How could I regret that?" They sat together, watching the stars, comfortable in the silence that only comes from decades of companionship. Tessa thought about the young woman she had been, abandoned and terrified at that trading post. She thought about how close she had come to a completely different life, one filled with hardship and struggle. But Yates had found her. He had offered her not just shelter but a home, not just work but purpose, not just companionship but love. He had given her a family when hers had cast her aside, and she had given him the same. She had brought him back to life after Sarah's death, had filled his house with warmth and eventually with children. They had built this life together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. "I love you," Tessa said, the words as true now as they had been 41 years ago. "I love you too," Yates replied. "Always have, always will." As they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they had worked, filled with the love of the family they had created, Tessa felt complete. She had been left behind once, abandoned by people who should have cherished her. But that abandonment had led her here, to Yates, to this beautiful life. She had learned that family was not about blood or obligation. It was about choice and commitment. It was about showing up every day and choosing to love, choosing to stay, choosing to build something lasting together. Yates had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but herself. He had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. And she had chosen him in return, every day for 41 years. Their children had all found good partners, people who loved and respected them. Their grandchildren were growing up happy and secure, knowing they were loved and wanted. The ranch was prosperous and would continue for generations. It was, Tessa thought, a legacy worth leaving. Not just the land and the buildings, but the values they had instilled in their children. The importance of hard work and honesty, the value of community and helping others. The understanding that family was something you built, not just something you were born into. As the years continued to pass, Tessa and Yates aged gracefully together. They took daily walks around the property, watching the seasons change, seeing their grandchildren grow. They sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. When Yates's health began to decline in his late 60s, Tessa nursed him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. She made sure he was comfortable, that he had everything he needed, that he knew every single day how much he was loved. On a crisp autumn morning in 1901, Yates passed away peacefully in their bed, holding Tessa's hand. His last words were, "Thank you for the life we built together. Thank you for being my love." Tessa grieved deeply but without regret. They had had 47 years together, years filled with love and purpose. She had loved him with everything she was, and he had loved her the same way. There was no unfinished business between them, no words left unsaid. She lived for another 12 years after Yates died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, telling stories of the old days, passing down family history, making sure everyone knew where they came from. On her deathbed in 1913, at the age of 78, Tessa gathered her family around her. Jamie held one hand, Sarah the other, with Thomas and Rose close by. Her grandchildren crowded into the room, not wanting to miss these final moments. "I want you all to know something," Tessa said, her voice weak but clear. "I was left behind once, abandoned by my birth family. It was the most painful thing that ever happened to me. But it led me to your father, to this ranch, to all of you. Being left behind was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the best chapter." "We love you, Mama," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "And I love all of you," Tessa said. "You were my second chance, my real family. Remember that family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up, who stays, who loves you even when it is hard." Those were her last words. She closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, joining Yates in whatever came next. They buried her next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers grew every spring. Their tombstone reads simply, "Yates and Tessa Fletcher. They built a family from nothing but love." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants. The story of how Yates found Tessa at the abandoned trading post became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best outcomes, that being broken open can let the light in. That family is something you choose to create every single day. And in the meadow behind the house, where Yates and Tessa had married so many years ago, wildflowers continued to bloom every spring, a living testament to a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful and lasting.